What happens when one man tries to watch all of the horror films of the 1980s? Well, we're about to find out because I'm that one man. I'm your host, Josh Spiegel, and this is the 80s Project, 1980. We're getting ever so much closer to the end of 1980 here, and it's already pretty wild how different the films are starting to feel. We've gone from films that just absolutely felt like they belonged in the 70s to seeing things that we relate to the 1980s creep in. Join me now as we check out this particularly oddball block encompassing the films that came out around the Halloween season, and oddly enough, a Christmas movie. We'll kick off on October 20th with Stage Fright, which kicks off back in 1963, which was apparently an active year for horror movie prologues. This is also called Nightmares and shouldn't be confused with the Italian owl mask Stage Fright or the more recent musical horror film. Little Kathy accidentally causes a car wreck that kills her mother, and she then goes a little mad. It then flashes to present day, and Kathy is now Jenny Newman, who you may remember as Barbara from V, and she's auditioning for a play while taking a new name of Helen. She gets the role, and soon there's an unseen killer attacking the other actors with shards of glass, while Kathy becomes more and more unhinged. And starts a relationship with Terry here, who's played by Gary Sweet. Now, Sweet was never really established here in America, but he's a major television and stage star down under, which is where this film was made. It was actually his very first acting gig, which he looks back on as a pretty terrible film, but made him realize that he really enjoyed acting and wanted to pursue it as a regular career. Before you can say Norman Bates, she seems to talk to her mother, who she calls Kathy, and it sure does look like she's doing the killing. Unless there's more to this mystery after all? On the night of the big play premiere, there's issues with, you guessed it, Stage Fright, and a mean old critic, a character that was reportedly based on an actual Australian film critic who was known to be rather harsh. It didn't do too well at the time. It was kind of brushed off by its own distributor and suffers from a mystery that seems to think it's a mystery while at the same time just sort of being exactly what you thought it would be from the first 10 minutes. My rating on this is a 2.5. It's entertaining enough, but just kind of never finds its groove, and the reveal at the end is a total bust. Its horror cultural significance is just a 1.5. It's a solid entry in the slasher genre, but didn't really give anything new at all, and it didn't really feature any notable horror players, and is mostly forgotten in favor of other movies that share the same name. Should you watch it? Maybe. It's not a terrible watch, but it's also not that great either.
It's your fault! You whistled! Shut up, Sue! He whistled and Angela's dead!
2 days later, on October 22nd, in France, there was La Nuit de la Mort, or The Night of Death. This is a French film that has Martine here taking on a new job as a nurse at a classic big ol' spooky mansion. This one a retirement home with some oddball denizens. Stranger than that, though, are her bosses, and all of the patients there are on a vegetarian diet. She bonds with the other nurse on staff, and crazy old Mr. Leon causes trouble. But there's also some mysterious goings-on at night where the residents kill the previous nurse with a cleaver. I guess that's not too mysterious, like we know what they do. But then they drain her blood and eat her. So, maybe not vegetarians after all. Things start to escalate at the house while Martine is told that Nicole quit, but soon realizes that things are not what they seem. And what's interesting here is that the main actress, Isabelle Gauguin, who plays Martine, wasn't really an actress, although she was in a few things, and this is her only lead role, but her other job was as an assistant director for French adult films. And before you ask, they have assistant directors for adult films? Yes, they did in the 1970s and 80s when X-rated flicks were full-on productions with film and budgets. There's an element of camp on display here and some genuine wacky characters throughout, but it's not played like a comedy either. And Martine discovers that the head of the home has been alive since the 1800s. And I love that she actually has to write down the difference between the 2 years to figure her age out. Like, do you really need pen and paper to figure out the amount of time between 1886 and 1980? Besides the camp, there's also some genuine mood going on here, and by mood, I'm referring to Flavian's really high-waisted pants. My rating here is a 3.5 because this was a total surprise. What a fun little flick that has some genuine atmosphere and wild characters that's only bogged down by a bit sluggish second act. Its significance is lower though, since it's not one that's really talked about or heard of and didn't exactly set the horror world on fire, so I'm just gonna give it a 1.5. Should you watch it? Yeah, seek it out. It is a cool flick.
Une femme, je le sais.
Écoutez, ça suffit, Monsieur Léon, maintenant. Allez!
Oh, shut up!
October 22nd was a busy day in France because it also saw the release of Cannibal Terror, and it was directed by Alain Deroule, who had mostly done erotica up to that point. So here's the trick with this one. It was actually a joint production with Jesus Franco, as producers saw a way to save money. So this film was shot at the same time as his White Cannibal Queen, which I featured on the last episode. They used several of the same actors and locations, and even some footage, with various sources claiming that Franco even co-wrote the script, although Deroule denounces that and says the only connection was the shared set and actors. The plot gives us a trio of crooks, one of who is Antonio Mayans, who was also in White Cannibal Queen, and things start to go wrong. Their getaway truck breaks down and they're attacked by the local cannibals. They make it to the hideout though, but Mario crosses the line and assaults the owner's wife, causing their plan to fall apart and leaving them to deal with the natives. Olivier Mathot also appears here as the little kidnapped victim's father, and he's another carryover from Cannibal Queen, and this one just has a reputation as being a cheap knockoff of the cannibal genre and showed up at the end of its popularity. The lack of an Italian director and the fact that it appears to have just been shot in people's backyards instead of an actual jungle add to that. Oh, and having the tribe of cannibals be played by what appears to be mostly white guys in face paint and possibly Tom Savini? I mean, seriously, look at these jungle cannibals that they even refer to as Indians at one point. It was shown at Cannes back in 1980, and reportedly the audience laughed through the entire film, causing the producer to get up afterwards and introduce the director as the man responsible for this botch-up. My rating on it is pretty low. It's a 1.5. It's pretty dull, and I guess I'm just not into this whole cannibal genre. Its HCS is just a 1 since it's a blatant cash-in with nothing really new to offer and is all but forgotten. Should you watch it? Nah, you can skip it.
Maybe you want to get your flippity-floppity boobies lifted.
On Halloween, October 31st, we have Night of the Demon, singular. It'll still be a few years before we get the demons. But this one starts off with an attack in the woods and a man's arm ripped off, and he's definitely not just tucking it into his shirt here, and it looks like it's the work of Bigfoot. Then there's an anthropology class, and the teacher is discussing a series of disappearances in the nearby woods, and a woman wants help in figuring out how her father was killed. So yeah, recruit a bunch of college kids to help out, I guess. This was shot in 1979 actually, so I suppose liabilities and such weren't really a thing, because I imagine telling a bunch of parents that you're taking their kids up into the woods to investigate a series of murders would not go well. And there's a lot to talk about here. It was directed by James Wasson, and this would be the only mainstream film that he worked on, with his entire rest of his directing career being in the gay porn industry. It was filmed for around 70 grand, and after it was completed, it ran at a local film festival in LA. The audience didn't really care for it, which sent producer Jim Ball into a panic, and in order to salvage the film, he went and shot several flashback scenes with additional Bigfoot attacks, with additional gore and nudity. Wasson wasn't involved in any of this, as his initial cut was practically PG in nature, and the extra scenes were done without his knowledge or participation. All that extra GRU added earned it a spot on the UK video nasty list, getting it banned there, mainly due to a castration scene that would go on to become the film's most notorious element. There's also a subplot about the town doing a sort of Bigfoot impregnation ritual, and a woman named Wanda who had given birth to the Sasquatch's baby at one point, and the interference wasn't just limited to the added gore stuff. Ball changed the ending of the film as well. Originally, most of the class was to have survived, with the Bigfoot only killing a couple of them and the rest would be rescued via helicopter. The producer decided it would be more marketable with more death, so he removed that ending and reshot the finale to include everyone's death, so only the professor survives. Oh, and by the way, this is what they went with on the design for the Bigfoot. My rating on this one is a 2.5, because although the Bigfoot shock scenes are pretty fun, and it definitely has some great silly moments, there's some lag going on in the first hour that makes it less enjoyable. Its significance is a 2, since beyond being on the video nasty list, it's not that well remembered and thought about, and doesn't really have much to stand out with, besides its handful of gore moments. Should you watch it? Probably, just know it takes a while in between the kills to get anywhere. Now it's time for a change of pace, since we've been covering things full of actors you're not familiar with, but how about Witch's Brew, which also came out on October 31st, and it takes place on a college campus. And Inga is here as a member of a group of wives that practice witchcraft. And one is Linda here, and if you love B-horror, then you'll recognize her from Jack Frost as the mom that gets turned into a Christmas tree. The Tan Dracula's greatest enemy is here, and they're trying to use spells to help their husband's career. And Lana freaking Turner is in this movie, and it was her final film role. She did a couple of TV show episodes after this, but no further films, and she's also a witch with an egg artifact that the other wives want. Jonathan makes Margaret quit witchcraft, so she takes off all the spells that she wove for him, and things immediately start to go wrong for him, including being accused of sexual assault, car trouble, losing a promotion, and hold up, Angus Scrim is in this, but for some reason, they gave him this voice?
Good evening, Carl.
Good evening, Joshua. I hope you can resolve this distasteful Kenneth Moore affair before it causes any further embarrassment.
Like anyone watching this film instantly knows, that's not how he sounds. Were they like, oh no, sorry, we can't have this character sound cool, so we'll just pop in this dude's voice instead? So this film was an adaptation of a novel by Fritz Lieber Jr. called Conjure Wife, although the film doesn't actually state that anywhere. It had been previously adapted in 1944 with Lon Chaney Jr. in a film called Weird Woman, and again in 1962 with Peter Wyngarde called Night of the Eagle. It was directed, or at least partially, by Richard Shore, who only directed 3 films, but had a huge career as a sound editor and was even nominated for an Oscar for his work on Die Hard. I say that he only partially directed this one because he was fired about halfway through and replaced by longtime director Herbert Strock, who I just discussed in a recent episode about the movie Monstroid. Things escalate when that egg thing hatches into a full-on I-beam blasting demon that flies and tries to kill Jonathan, and pretty soon it's full-on war between the witches, and Vivian steals Margaret's body, prompting him to start believing to save himself and his wife. My rating on it is a 2.5. It's got some fun moments going on and some good comedy, and I love that gargoyle design, but there's just not enough meat on this story. Its significance is just a 2 because it's barely horror and is mostly comedy, but it does have a cool creature and some solid names involved. Should you watch it? Maybe. It's sort of a basic movie of the week kind of thing, so if that sounds cool, go for it. Also on Halloween that year was The Awakening, and it begins in Egypt 18 years ago on an archaeological dig with Ben-Hur, along with his wife and assistant Jane. They're on the hunt for an ancient Egyptian queen who may be buried there, and they find the tomb, but at the same time, Matt's wife goes into a premature labor and an eventual stillbirth. But as Matt and Jane open the tomb, the baby returns to life. Bad luck hits the dig and Annie leaves Matt, taking the baby, and the film then bounces to the present, and you know the time has passed because Matt has a beard now, and it has some white in it, which is a clear indication of age. His daughter is turning 18 years old and is played by the real star of Remington Steele, and Matt is now married to Jane. And this movie was an attempt to ride the coattails of the big budget horror boom that was happening around the time, and is often compared to The Omen in terms of content and overall feel, with people getting killed in horrific accidents. It was directed by Mike Newell, and although he had done extensive work on television and TV movies, this was his theatrical directing debut. He went on to pretty big projects like 4 Weddings and a Funeral, Donnie Brasco, and Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, and Prince of Persia. If the plot is familiar, it's because it's based on Bram Stoker's take on the mummy mythology, The Jewel of the Seven Stars, and had a couple of previous adaptations, including one from Hammer called Blood from the Mummy's Tomb. And hey, speaking of mummies, we finally get one at around the 1 hour mark, and this one was also very much dunked on when it came out. It got overwhelmingly negative reviews, with most calling it pretty stale and predictable, and Siskel calling it one of the worst movies of 1980. It didn't do too well at the box office either, only bringing in a total of $8 million against a budget of $5, and disappeared from the public eye pretty quickly. My rating on it is a 2 because, yeah, it's not a thrilling film at all, pretty dull and drags, and I've seen it all before. Its significance is also a 2 because it is a little remembered and it's known as Heston's only foray into actual horror, so it gets a little oomph for that. Should you watch it? You could probably skip it. There's a handful of interesting deaths, but not much else.
Maybe he's the one. Him and his goddamn
October 31st was busy that year, as another release on that same day was The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, although this one was a made-for-television film. It starts with Ichabod Crane rolling into town, here played by Seth Brundle, and Paul Sand is here as well, as is Dick Butkus. And when Crane arrives, he immediately locks eyes with the lovely Katrina, but let's face it, there's physically no way to not lock eyes with Meg Foster when she looks at you with those things. Like the book it's based on, Ichabod doesn't believe in the local legends, and this version was actually an offshoot of Classics Illustrated. If you're unfamiliar, there was a line of comic book style adaptations of iconic novels to appeal to younger readers. The company produced a series of television movies to tie into them, including this one, The Time Machine, The Fall of the House of Usher, and several more. Its original airing had hosts and skits in between the commercial breaks with Gary Coleman and Steve Allen. He begins to integrate into the regular town life and forms a rivalry with Brom and Frederick, and there's love triangle stuff happening, and he's visited by ghosts who warn of the Headless Horseman coming. And if you're familiar with the story, this is somewhat faithful, but also not. It alters some characters and adds some subplots, but most of all, changes the tone. Since it's a made-for-TV movie, it has a much less moody atmosphere and a light-hearted tone, and a happy ending. My rating here is a 2.5. It's fun and all, and Goldblum and the cast are delightful, but it kind of drains all the Halloween out of it and maybe goes on for a bit too long. Its significance is a 2.5 because it does have some merit and it's a classic horror tale retold with some big names, although it didn't really have a big impact on the film world. Should you watch it? Probably. It's not great, but it's fun and enjoyable enough and a good holiday standard.
Turn around once or twice so he can see you ain't got no sharp corners.
Oh, Papa, you're terrible.
Ah, yes. That constant issue men deal with. Women with sharp corners? Here's one that didn't have a confirmed date, but it did come out in November, and it's The Day Time Ended, a film that was recently featured on MST3K. It begins with classic cowboy actor Jim Davis, not Garfield, Jim Davis, and his family, including Chris Mitchum here, son of Robert Mitchum. But he's not James, who is a different Mitchum son that was featured on the project a few episodes back in Monstroid. The fam is moving out to the desert, and grandson Steve is here, and if they told me that this character was 14 years old, I'd be down for that, but also if they told me he was 32. This weird thing that looks like a Land of the Lost pylon shows up, and little Jenny starts seeing odd things around the house. There's then Lights in the Sky, and this was directed by John Bud Cardos, who is perhaps most known for Kingdom of the Spiders, and it was produced by Charles Band. His son Richard did the music for the film, and band regular Ted Nicolau edited it, so there was a lot of Empire and Full Moon crew on staff here. David Allen is even on board to provide some cool stop motion animation, and pretty soon there's some little alien ships after them, giant monsters battling, and it's sort of more of an effects reel than it is a movie. The family just ends up coming up against challenge after challenge that don't really connect with each other, and it feels like a strange fever dream that kinda wants to be Close Encounters of the Third Kind, but also kinda doesn't. There's really no box office information on the film, although it was pretty poorly reviewed at the time, with critics citing its aimlessness and pointing out the flaws in the low-budget effects. My rating on it is a 2, since I like the stop motion guys, but there's just nothing really to hook me in here, and no story. It's better to watch it with robots making jokes. Its HCS is a 1.5, since there's that David Allen work here and the presence of the bands, but that's about it. Should you watch it? It's pretty skippable, unless I guess it's the MST3K version. We're going back to Italy now, and on November 6th, The House on the Edge of the Park was released, even though it wouldn't get a US run until 1985. It doesn't waste any time before giving us David Hess assaulting a woman and then strangling her before the opening title scene. Giovanni Radice is here for his third appearance this year. He appeared back in Cannibal in the Streets, as well as City of the Living Dead, and Alex and Ricky connive their way into getting invited to a posh party. At first, everything seems to be going fine. But then there's some card cheating, which leads to a fight, and things start to get antagonistic. And they take over the entire party, slashing them with his straight razor, and there's times when it seems really odd that he can control this whole party. Like he's one guy with a razor because Ricky's freaked out and not even really helping him. So this was directed by Ruggero Deodato, who had also done that year's Cannibal Holocaust, and with the name House on the Edge of the Park and starring David Hess, you might be getting some Last House on the Left vibes, especially considering the subject matter, and that was intentional. They gave the film the title they did, and specifically cast Hess in order to try and capitalize on it, and is considered a loose remake. They wanted Hess for the part so badly they actually gave him partial film rights to appear in it, and supposedly bragged on set that the sex between him and Annie Bell in the film is not simulated, although his co-stars don't really believe him. Considering that Hess was married at the time and his wife played the victim in the opening scenes, it seems like he might have been stretching the truth. It's also said that Marie-Claude Joseph, who only appears in this film and absolutely nothing else, was not an actress and was simply a hotel owner that Deodato met and was having an affair with, so he gave her a spot in the film. At that time, he was also romantically involved with Francesca Ciardi from Cannibal Holocaust, and here's a picture of him at the time. So I guess become a director, kids. The movie made its way onto the Video Nasty list in the UK and was only released there in 2002 with all the violence removed. I'm gonna go ahead and give this one a 2 because it's not my style of horror. It's just a cavalcade of terrible people being terrible with the thinnest of plots that doesn't make a lick of sense, with no one just like leaving the house, especially considering the ending reveals there's been a gun in the house the entire time, and it's just like right there, but no one thought to grab it at any earlier point. Its significance is a little higher though at a 2.5 because you've got Ruggero in the chair and Hess as your lead, basically doing another version of one of horror's most notorious films. Should you watch it? I guess not. I suppose if this style of thing floats your boat, but it certainly doesn't float mine. The last movie for this block came out on November 7th, and it's the classic Christmas Evil, which is appropriate for our December episode, even though they put out a freaking Christmas horror movie in early November for some reason. It begins with a flashback to Christmas of 1947 as little Harry sees his mom getting groped by Santa Claus and kind of freaks out, and let's face it, I think I would too. Like Saint Nick is just sort of down there, but not doing anything and just kind of staring at her fully clothed lady parts. I'm not one to kink shame, but I think there's a reason Christmas only comes once a year. It then jumps ahead to the present, with Harry now all grown up and a little bit obsessed with the holiday season. When I say a little bit obsessed, I mean keeping tabs on the local kids, including the notorious Moss Garcia. Moss is pretty bad. Kid throws rocks at dogs, and that's not cool. But come on, Harry, picks his nose? You have that on the same level of naughty as smoking cigarettes? Apparently, Harry works at a toy factory and starts to unravel. His brother is played by Jeffrey DeMunn, who looks a lot different when he was younger, but you'll remember him as the sheriff from the Blob remake, or from the backseat of that car in The Mist, along with the back window and a bit on the dashboard. Harry starts getting creepier, like muddying up his face to spy on Moss, and is Moss a nickname for something? What is Moss short for, do you think? Well, his mom is Jill Taylor in her debut role, slapping the hell out of her kid. And on the night of Christmas Eve, Harry dresses up in full Santa garb and heads out in his custom painted truck to deliver gifts to the good children and punishment to the bad people out there. What looks on the outside to be another guy in a Santa suit slasher film ends up being a pretty deliberate character study of a descent into madness. You're never quite sure what Harry's going to do, and the film leaves you guessing. It was directed by Lewis Jackson and was his final film, and at its time of release received pretty solid reviews but didn't make a big splash at the box office, but has since gone on to develop a decent-sized cult following, with John Waters referring to it as the greatest Christmas movie ever made. One thing that stands out here is the ambiguous ending, which viewers either love or hate, but like the plot itself, it keeps you guessing. My rating on this one is a 3.5, and I think it's pretty marvelous, and what a great performance by Brandon Maggart as Harry. I just wish that it was a little sharper paced. Its significance is a 3 since it's an early Christmas-themed slasher, predating even Silent Night, Deadly Night, featuring some effective effects, and really played with the slasher genre. Should you watch it? Yes, and I can't think of a better time. Pop it on right now to get yourself in the holiday spirit and make sure that you're not on Harry's naughty list. So there you have it, 10 movies from getting close to the ending of 1980. We're almost there through this year, guys. We're almost there. And my favorite in this block is probably Christmas Evil. It's just such a fun movie. It was close between that one and Night of Death, which was surprising to me because I had never seen it before and I really enjoyed it. But Christmas Evil is just a winner for me. I first saw it a few years back when we did the Dead Last episode, and I've watched it like twice since. It's just a fun holiday movie to get me into that weird spirit. So I would recommend checking that one out. Let me know down below in the comments which is your favorite of this block. Which one of these did you love? Which one of these do you want to seek out after hearing about it for the first time? Tell me that in the comments or send an email to themovietimelinesguy@gmail.com. If you get a chance, please click on that like button, subscribe to the channel, and if you want to, go to patreon.com/movietimelines and become a patron like these guys over here. Thank you to them for helping keep the channel going and keeping this project going. And we see you very shortly as we continue on with the 80s Project.